My name is Lauren Taraka, and I am going to be telling you about the acoustic monitoring of the Clark's Nutcracker in Whitebark Pine habitat of the North Cascades. First, a little introduction to the Whitebark Pine ecosystem. Whitebark pine is a keystone tree species that is native to the subalpine Cascades. Their population is in decline due to various threats that I will discuss later. They produce cones that are cached solely by the Clark's Nutcracker. They are also a candidate species under the Endangered Species Act and listed as endangered on IUCN Red List. The Clark's Nutcracker is a corvid bird species and forager and sole seed disperser of whitebark pine seeds. They rely on each other for resources and reproduction. The nutcracker is the only species that removes the whitebark pine seeds and caches them, making it an essential mutualism for sustainability. There are various threats that are greatly impacting whitebark pine ecosystems. The first is white pine blister rust. This is an invasive European fungal species that spreads through ripe trees to the host. For example, locally, there has been an increase of infected whitebark pine from 32% to 51% between 2004 to 2016 in North Cascade National Park. In Mount Rainier National Park, this increase was 18% to 38% in the same time span. The next threat, the mountain pine beetle, is native to the U.S. but is becoming more common due to warming temperatures. Outbreaks are having a greater effect on cone crop of whitebark pine in various areas. The third threat are fires. There have always been small fires in the subalpine habitat. In the past, people began suppressing fires. Now much larger fires come through and affect whitebark pine significantly more than they used to. And the final threat is climate change. An increase in temperatures greatly affects subalpine and alpine species because it leaves nowhere for the plants and animals to go. As climate increases, the number of fires occurring will increase as well, which will continue to weaken the population, allowing for the beetles and blister rust to have a greater impact. The whitebark pine and Clark's Nutcracker relationship is essential. There cannot be one without the other. As you can see, lower whitebark pine cone production leads to fewer cones for nutcrackers to consume, which leads to lower nutcracker reproduction rates and fewer nutcrackers to cache seeds. It also leads to fewer cones for nutcrackers to cache, which leads to less nutcracker seed dispersal and fewer seeds cached to germinate, and then we just repeat this cycle. The whitebark pine decline leads to a nutcracker decline, and we have a cascade effect, which refers to the inevitable chain of events leading to the rapid decrease of the population if conservation efforts aren't implemented. There are several restoration projects already being done across whitebark pine range. This includes seed collection, planting, and prescribed burns. Nutcrackers are an important factor, which is why we are assessing occupancy through acoustic monitoring and surveys to provide data to management for determining where to focus planting of blister rust resistant trees, which is the fungal disease explained earlier. Here is a map of our acoustic monitoring study site locations. We placed 12 monitors above 1,830 meters. We had 3 primary areas, each with 2 sub-areas, and each sub-area with paired focal areas. We generated random points using ArcGIS, and as you can see on this locator map of Washington, all of our monitors were in a geographically small area. We had 10 Swift monitors and 2 song meters, recording between July 2nd and October 25th, adding up to 908 days of data. We recorded from 4 a.m. to 9 p.m. with a sampling rate of 16 kilohertz. This allowed us to catch Clark's Nutcracker calls, but have manageably sized files and longer battery life. In the field, we did 4 types of habitat surveys: visual occupancy surveys, belt transects, point quarter surveys, and cone counts to assess the habitat layout and 2020 cone crop at each site. In the end, we had recorded 908 days of acoustic data. We used Raven Pro 1.6 software to visually scan for nutcracker calls, then mark whether there was at least one nutcracker heard that day. Then for data analysis, we used unmarked R package with a single species multi-season model to determine which variables were predictors of birds visiting and leaving the focal areas. and the ability for the monitors to detect their presence. The results that I obtained from the habitat surveys and acoustic monitoring were quite interesting. Now, I'm not expecting you to interpret all of this, I'm just showing you the model set that I used for my data. Detection refers to whether a nutcracker is present when we are not observing them, while the occupancy models allow me to assess the probability of a nutcracker occurring at a site. We found that weather is a strong predictor of detection. None of our variables are predictors of birds coming into the focal area or colonization. And date is the only strong predictor of the birds leaving the focal area, or also known as extinction. With all the factors that we included in our research and in our models, the only ones that had any effect were date and weather. In previous nutcracker research conducted, date was the only strong factor affecting nutcracker presence in an area. This is extremely important moving forward with planning conservation measures. Factors such as cone presence and absence, whitebark pine per hectare, ponderosa pine per hectare, and Douglas fir per hectare had no strong effect. As for weather, it is important to take into account that weather does have an effect on how easily nutcrackers are detected. We also have to realize that the local habitat doesn't necessarily reflect the larger area, which is why future work at a landscape level is important to better understand this relationship. These birds have a large traveling range, which is what makes the larger habitat so important. All monitors this year were in a relatively small geographic range. As for cone crop numbers, 2020 was a low cone year, meaning that 2021 will give us much better cone count data based on cone data already taken. There is plenty of future work to be done, including accurately mapping whitebark pine on the landscape to evaluate how the proportion of whitebark pine impacts occupancy. Douglas fir and ponderosa pine have accurate landscape coverage with GNN data, but whitebark pine is too inaccurate for us to use for this particular research. We also need better documentation of whitebark pine cone presence and absence, and cone density at survey points and in the surrounding landscape. We can do this by recruiting citizen scientists to take part in doing habitat surveys to get more robust data. This was a low cone year. 2021 will be a high cone year, so citizen scientists will be very helpful in conducting accurate cone counts. And finally, our lab group has developed an automatic detector to automatically scan recordings. This is far more efficient than manual scanning each day. This is already being done by CW students on our team, and they are currently working to fine-tune it. There are several people that I would like to thank for making this project possible for me. First, Dr. Allison Scoville. She introduced me to the project and has helped me every step of the way through knowledge, fieldwork, planning, paper writing, and the list goes on. Dr. Taza Shaming also made being part of the project possible and has shared a plethora of nutcracker and whitebark pine knowledge with me. She has assisted me in every step, including planning, paper writing, and once again the list goes on. Dr. Teresa Lawrence and Phil Fisher. They have helped a ton in the field and provided lots of tools, resources, and knowledge of the Washington whitebark pine habitat and Clark's nutcrackers. Central Washington University for my education and the opportunity to pursue this project. The rest of the Nutcracker and Whitebark Pine crew, including Benedict Rees, Drew Bland, Sydney Rees, Lily Fuel, Jasmine Ruiz, Nancy Parra, and Isaac Larson, for helping scan acoustic recordings, conduct fieldwork, plan, and record and transcribe data. Also, the 2020 COTS SURE grant for funding my summer research, and the Wildlife Society Washington Chapter and U.S. Forest Service for funding the summer 2020 research, and Stu Smith for putting together all the maps for my paper and my presentation. I could not have done this research without the devotion of everyone on this list, so thank you. Thank you, and I hope that you enjoyed my presentation.